Hi, everyone. Welcome. My name's Pete Castaldi. I'm both an active AACTA and Screenworks member. I jumped on board to do this last year in the first year of this brilliant initiative when it went to Zoom. I used to work in as a television journalist and in film distribution, in film exhibition. I stay very, very strongly attached to screen, and I've always had a great and strong love for my own native film industry, the Australian film industry. It's always been my passion, and I'll always support it. So it's why I'm very happy to be involved with this and to meet people who are working at the very beginning of telling new Australian stories. Before I go on, I have to acknowledge that I'm speaking to you from the land of the Gadigal people, currently known as Sydney Lakes. But I actually live on the lands of the Dirungible people, which is just north of the Brunswick River in the Northern Rivers of New South Wales. So I pay my respects to them and acknowledge the fact that we're all coming from very different places and speaking together from the lands and peoples of many different nations. The way this will work is I'll go through introducing the judges and I'll get them to kind of throw a quick question from their point of view of what they're going to be looking for in your pitches. Once the judges are introduced and they've asked their questions, then we'll work through the pitches. I will be running a timer. I won't start the timer until you actually start the pitch. And at 3 minutes, I will go, excuse me, it's time to stop. After that 3 minutes, the judges will each have an opportunity to ask you a question about your project if they feel they need you to kind of elucidate a little bit more or continue on with some further questions. And then as soon as that process is over, we'll move to the next pitch. So without further ado, and acknowledging that you're all coming to this as very talented people, you're all lined up for an amazing round of opportunity and support. AACTA will continue to support all of the participants. And I know from last year that all of the judges as well as AACTA maintained that relationship with everyone who got to this stage. There are 200 entries and there are 7 of you. So it means you've actually kind of hit a mark. So here we go. Our first judge, Claire Gandy, who is the General Manager of Content at Event Cinemas. Now, Claire, I wanted to ask you, what do you look for in a film when it lands on your desk when you're going to consider programming it for an events for all your event screens?
I'm lucky enough to come in at the completed part of the filmmaking. Always look for story. Is the story compelling? Is it interesting? Are the characters layered? Production value, obviously, from a finished film. Does it look good? And will it look good on the big screen? So that's a big part of it. Sellability. What's on the poster, is it going to sell to audiences? And obviously the commercial value, which is the box office. It's great to make a film that you love, but it's even better to make a film that you love that people want to see. And obviously we want people to see as many local stories as possible. So absolutely box office is a huge part of what I do when I'm watching or reviewing a film. How much money is it going to make for us? And in turn, how much money is it going to make for you as well? In tandem with that commercial part is who's the audience? So who can we get out there? Who's part of our community that we can sell this to? Who it's going to connect with? And what's the genre? Is there a clear genre? It's not pigeonholing films as such, because it's great when there's multi-genred films, but it does help us really identify the core audience, and then from that, the secondary, third, fourth audiences, so that it can speak to these people who then help us speak to everybody else. That's pretty much in a nutshell how I look at film. And because I love it.
Yeah. Well, there you go. That's a nutshell. So in reality, that's the subtext to every pitch you're about to listen to, one would hope. Our next judge is Pallavi Shah. Pallavi, as an actor and a writer, what in the script makes you want to be involved?
As Claire said, the story is always first, and making sure all the elements of good screenwriting is there. That's the first thing. But for me, as someone who is considered ethnically diverse as an actress, what I'm often looking for is making sure that when I'm being cast, there's authenticity behind the characters that have been written with me in mind, or that I'm being cast as. And we're not just following this kind of tokenistic view of how we cast diverse or have cast diversely traditionally, particularly in Australia. So I think I'm starting to see that more and more in the industry. There's actually a bit of care being taken to make sure that characters are fleshed out when they are ethnically diverse, and making sure that they're not there just as poster and tick boxes for what the zeitgeist is ordaining at the moment. And I think with this particular competition, while it's focusing on regional Australia, one of the things that I keep noting is that regional Australia doesn't preclude that kind of diversity from its storytelling. In fact, there are so many communities and so many wonderful Australian characters in real life that deserve to have their stories told on screen. And whether or not you had that in mind as you were writing, I think that there are ways in which those stories can be incorporated, even at a later stage, to make sure that we're kind of representing adequately.
Thank you, Pallavi. Our next judge is Isabel Stanfield, who's a producer at C Pictures. So, Isabel, when a script lands on your desk, what does it have to scream at you for you to want to produce it, to want to make it?
It's always exciting when you get a script land on your desk and know that you are kind of, at the beginning of the production process. And, when we take on films, it's absolutely a consideration that we're all going to spend, the next 3 years telling this story together. And so it always, really has to appeal to us personally, as well as, have a lot of appeal to an audience. We need to be really certain of what the tone is and where that audience sits in Australia. We think a lot about the cast that it'll appeal to in the Australian industry, and who it is that we can fill the roles with, and also who it's representing in Australia as well, and whether the stories that need to be told and that are engaging to Australian audiences are within those scripts.
Thank you, Isabel. Virginia Whitwell, our next judge, head of production at Good Thing Productions. So, Virginia, if there's one key piece of advice, one piece of information that you need to be able to glean from these pitches, what would it be?
I suppose in a key term, I was thinking about it possibly in terms of how the key thing that we look for as a company. But I think if it's a clear and succinct way of conveying the heart of your story and staying true to that. So if whoever your protagonist is, that it's clear from the get-go that's how you're positioning your script, or certainly setting the scene as clearly as possible when you've got a limited opportunity to really convey themes and a story well to somebody who's potentially reading your script. And I suppose that, sort of echoing what the others have said, it's really about seeing the brilliance of the idea coming through, because, to quote Netflix, I believe they say they like stories that are undeniable. And I think that's where, if you can clearly show the specialness and the uniqueness of your story, that would be one of the main things to keep coming back to and keep reflecting in every way that you're selling your story. Thanks, Virginia. So to all the pitches now, if you need a couple of days to go and rework them, you're not going to get it. Our final judge is Mark Woods, who's the industry director at the Melbourne International Film Festival. So Mark, you would be the best person to ask. If there's one piece of advice you're going to give our pitchers today, what would it be?
In addition to 37 South, we also run an investment fund, the Premier Fund. And for the Premier Fund, our slogan is stories that need telling. And that carries across, I think, into how you would pitch at a market. Why is this a story that needs telling? It doesn't have to be a high and mighty do-gooder film, although those are good. But even if you're doing a rom-com or whatever, there's still a reason why the story has to be told. The world needs more fun, or, we need to see women in this sort of way, or, we have a business opportunity. But why does the story need telling? And then also remember, as a writer-director, particularly, but also producer, but as a writer-director, pretty much, in my view, every conversation that you have with anybody in the industry is a pitch, whether you know it or not. You are pitching to producers to try to get one. You're pitching to agents to try to get actors who you also have to pitch to. You're going to pitch to funding bureaucrats, distributors, sales agents, crew. Everything for a writer-director is a pitch. And so just remember that. And again, your mantra should be, why does this story need to be told? That's my short takeout.
Thank you. Thank you very much. So we're now going to get into the body of this. So pitchers, take a breath and get ready. Our first pitch is the alien abduction of Emily Hill from Michelle Brasier and Sam Lingham. Michelle and Sam, are you ready to go?
Yep.
Yeah, we're here.
Ready as we'll ever be.
Off you go.
Hi, I'm Michelle and this is Sam.
Hello.
I'm a comedian, actor, writer and singer. I live in Melbourne and I grew up in Wagga Wagga, teen pregnancy capital of Australia.
I'm the head writer for the comedy group Auntie Donna, and I grew up on a small farm near a small town called Rapanyup. Our pitch starts with two questions. What if aliens abducted a man right as he's down on one knee proposing to his girlfriend? What would happen to that man?
To be honest, we don't care. That's not what we're here for. We're interested in the girlfriend, the woman left behind. What would happen to her? Meet Emily Hill.
Emily lives in Yabby Flats. She likes singing at weddings, stargazing with her boyfriend Richard, sinking beers with her cousin Tim, and helping out Pop Knob on the farm.
All the men in the family are called Knob and no one knows why.
And since her dad left, she likes to just be there for her mum, even though their relationship is quite strained.
So when Richard gets down on one knee on stage at a drought relief concert, it should be the happiest moment of Emily's life. Instead, a golden beam of light sucks him up into the sky in front of her friends, family, and the whole world, thanks to a viral live stream.
We say viral, but this is beyond viral. This is huge. This is first contact. And Emily, the pretty woman with a nice singing voice, a cheery sense of humour, has become the poster girl for alien abductions. Everyone wants a piece of her, from the government to press, people with the tinfoil hats, everyone. Now, Emily's first instinct is to hide, but when she learns the farm is facing foreclosure due to her absent father demanding to be bought out, Emily decides to monetize her recent fame, accompanied by her cousin Tim,
a classic country girl,
and May,
a local reporter turned publicist and very pretty lady.
Emily steps forward and embraces the spotlight.
Still grieving Richard, clawing for answers, slowly falling in love with her publicist May, we see Emily on her rise to fame. Emily's a people pleaser, so she has trouble saying no, and we see her on Neighbours.
And Home and Away.
Jimmy Fallon.
And Jimmy Kimmel.
The Masked Singer.
And The Mask.
3, it's another sequel. She becomes intoxicated in this new city lifestyle.
Good news, Emily makes enough money to save the farm. Bad news, Emily doesn't recognise her life anymore. Taking a part as herself in a Broadway musical based on the fairy tale romance of Richard and Emily doesn't help. Living in a foreign city, swamped in the past and barely processed trauma, Emily begins to unravel. She realises that the grass is rarely greener, it's just different grass.
It only gets worse when Richard's family announces a funeral. In Yabby Flats, everything's changed. Area 51-style tourists are making up tennis numbers down at the club, and Emily's relationship with her loved ones is even more strained. New information and old memories crash together, causing Emily to question everything. Could Richard still be alive? Does May have ulterior motives? Will she win a gold Logie? The Alien Abduction of Emily Hill is a human story about an alien abduction. It's a rom-com, and it's also about regional landscapes.
Well done. That was well and truly down to the wire. Man, you were getting faster and faster. So, judges, do you have any questions for these two alien invaders?
Does Emily grieve her partner, or is she straight into the fame?
She's straight into her fame, trying to run from her grief. Okay. So, yeah, she's
just trying to figure out if her humanity for a second. Okay.
Yeah. So we have the first thing she says when he gets sucked up into the light is, classic case of cold feet. It's kind of based on myself and my response to a lot of grief that I've had in my life. I just go for comedy because I'm terrified. And I think a lot of women do that. And they always see us as so soft. And I think she's trying to look after everyone else before she takes care of her. And that's kind of what gets her into trouble.
Great, thanks.
Any more questions?
Do you guys have any visibility on any producers that you'd like to work with to bring this to life?
We're still sort of early days. I've had some producers I've worked with in the US that I'm very friendly with, but I wouldn't be approaching them until I'm very confident in where the project's at, basically. But not at this stage, no.
And the second question that I had was with reference to the the scope of the competition. Why does this have to be set in the country? It seems to me that you could be at a wedding in Coogee or in St Kilda and be beamed up by the aliens. So why does it have to be in a regional context, this story?
We just love the glorious thing. I mean, we're both from the country, and the thing that is really nice for us is the idea of tourists flooding a small town like where we grew up, especially where Sam grew up. It's much smaller. The idea of that world crashing, and that's kind of a country girl in the city is another alien thing. It's that sort of double meaning without being too, hacky. But we really like the idea of taking this country girl out of the city and giving her all the success when really she was happy in the country. She didn't ask for anything. It's not better just because you leave. It's different, and your problems will follow you no matter where you go.
Yeah.
You've nailed it. Okay, moving on. Our next pitcher is Leslie Simpson with Blackout. Your time starts now.
I'm Leslie Simpson, and I'm pitching Blackout, a feature-length thriller, approximately 90 minutes in length and aimed at the global horror market. Okay. 1,000 miles from anywhere, when the power goes out permanently in Alice Springs, the remote outback town plummets toward anarchy. In a desperate bid to stay alive, and with escape options running out, a small group of ordinary citizens establish a safe haven inside Bunnings' warehouse. But when the organizers reluctantly adopt a policy of women and children first, the enraged hordes, left to fend for themselves on the outside, soon turn on the makeshift sanctuary with savagery and arm themselves with anything they can lay their hands on. Now, power outages are normal in Alice Springs. Certain times of the year, it can go out a couple of times a week. But unlike anywhere else, nobody bats an eyelid. In an hour or two, the power comes back on and it's business as usual. Now, one day a couple of years ago, there was an outage that lasted a good slice of the day. My partner and I wandered into town and the place was deserted. It was very creepy, like a scene from Dawn of the Dead. So what happens when it's lights out for the Red Center? Within 36 hours, mobile phones and landlines die. FPOS machines are down and banks close their doors. Servo fuel bowsers don't work. There's no aircon and it's mid-40s in the shade. There's no internet, no social media, no game stations. Food goes off very quickly and contact with the outside world flatlines. Even the domestic water supply runs on electricity. Emergency generators wind down within 24 hours. Panic sets in, the looting starts. The airport's finished and so are the hospitals. Patients in the ICU and dialysis units drop like flies. Now, I don't need to tell anybody here that living in a small town that is literally almost 3 hours to get anywhere by aeroplane, and with nothing in between but searing desert and some of the most lethal animals anywhere on planet Earth, we'd be in serious, serious trouble. That's it.
Well done. You came in under time. Judges, do you have questions for Leslie?
Can I ask, you had some great references in there. The reason that the blackout is happening and, it continues for such a long time, is it like a supernatural thriller horror, or is it more of being attacked by humans or the government or something to that extent?
Firstly, it's Dawn of the Dead without the zombies. So yes, it is. But the thriller and horror audiences are interchangeable. Most people who are into horror, like myself, I'm a big fan of horror and I've been involved in the horror genre for a lot of years. They also like thrillers. So it would be aimed at that audience ultimately because they would be the ones that like it. There's no supernatural element to it whatsoever. During my research, I spoke to a chap called Professor Philip Bland, who's the head of the Desert Fireball Network and the foremost expert in meteorites in Australia, perhaps one of the major players in the world. And he told me that in Central Australia, we get peppered with meteorites. And the scenario that I've set up, that the Palm Valley gas pipe, which is about 120 k's west of the Alice, takes a direct hit from a meteorite no bigger than football. And when that happens, there's a fortnight to repair the pipe or ship in more diesel. And because people simply don't panic here when there's a power outage, they just wait. They are winding down the clock before that opportunity to ship in the diesel occurs. And I also have another setup where Norforce, which is a volunteer reserve army in Central Australia, they head off out there to secure the area, to secure the pipe. And because gas is heavier than air, basically, one of the chaps in an armored vehicle with a Colonel Gilgore fetish, he steps out of the armored vehicle with a lit cigar and basically fries the entire platoon. So Alice Springs is basically left to its own devices.
Any other judges with any other questions?
So same question, Leslie. Do you have any aspirations on what sort of producer would help you work on this?
Yes, I already have Neil Marshall, who was the director of the award-winning episodes of Game of Thrones. He also directed Westworld. He directed me as an actor in a couple of his early genre films, and he's already committed to EP for me. But I'm currently seeking advice from a couple of my friends in the horror genre here in Australia to point me in the right direction for a producer. Really, I need somebody who has expertise in genre film, really.
Okay, moving to our next pictures. In the 2-lane blacktop, Penny Greenhalgh and John Rex Williams with Oxys Fun Land.
Come on down to Coxey's, it's a world of thrills and fun. You can pat a bunch of wildlife, you can even shoot a gun. Your parents can relax while you all run around and scream. It's more than just a fun park, it's the land of Coxey's dreams. Can a sheltered 9-year-old outwit a raging madman in a rundown family fun park and save his parents?
I'm Penny.
I'm John.
And our project, Oxys Fun Land, is a feature-length horror comedy set on the New South Wales far south coast. It opens with a young urban couple in their 30s, Neil and Sam, on holiday with their 9-year-old son, Danny. They're horribly overprotective and have structured his whole life so far, shielding him from anything scary or dangerous, whether he needs it or not. As they drive towards Eden, they take an unexpected detour and end up stuck at Oxys Fun Land.
The eccentric Coxey appears and offers to help them, but only if they go on some of his rides. While Sammy and Neil argue, Danny jumps on one to prove that he can do things on his own, and he immediately gets hurt. In the ensuing panic, Coxey locks the screaming parents in his shed of horrors, and Danny runs away. With night falling, Danny has to make his way down broken slides, across electrified lakes, through a petting area full of feral animals, and into an enchanted forest of fairy tale nightmares and lethal animatronics, all with an enraged, gun-toting Coxey in pursuit.
Danny sets traps to stop Coxey, but he keeps coming. The police who come in to arrest Coxey aren't as lucky. Eventually, Danny cuts through a labyrinth hedge maze hoping to lose Coxey, but gets trapped in the very heart of it. When Coxey arrives, Danny has to fight or die.
So this is set around Mystery Bay and Tilba on the far south coast. It's an area that's just rarely seen in Aussie films, and especially horror, which is always kind of set in the outback or the city. It's rugged mountains, dense bushland, rolling green fields down to pristine beaches. It's a really popular holiday destination back in the 70s, 80s and 90s, but it's kind of been largely bypassed now and is really struggling to update itself and attract people. And it was also devastated by the bushfires last year, then the floods, then the pandemic, but the residents have fought on.
So our show, it's going to subvert the classic horror genre by swapping horny young people being chased by a faceless killer for a mollycoddled 9-year-old and his paranoid parents being harassed by a desperate fun park owner. And it uses a lot of nostalgia for the 80s and 90s and the ridiculous things we did for fun. And it brings in the reality of how unsafe and disturbing those things actually were. It's fans for M-rated horror and comedy films like Zombieland and Shaun of the Dead and series like Stranger Things. It's specifically Australian, but definitely has a universal appeal, given that we know that there's versions of Oxys Fun Land all over the world. It's like a funny version of Wolf Creek or a shit scary version of Home Alone.
Now, the family is written in a way to hopefully allow for diversity in the casting.
10 seconds.
we're imagining an Indian Australian or Chinese Australian couple born and raised here in their 30s. Hopefully we can collaborate with a producer, director, script editor with lived experience of that. And we also want to represent modern Australia.
Thumbs up.
And thumbs up.
Thumbs up. Well done. Nice one.
Yeah.
Judges, do we have any questions?
Now, I suppose just in terms of audience, because I love the idea of the core idea of it, but in terms of, I guess, the young lad's age, I was just feeling like in terms of where you would hit, because it's sort of almost like a family movie, but it's going to go into another sort of certificate at the cinema.
Yeah.
So I'm just wondering how you don't lose the family audience while you're also appealing in a Stranger Things type world. So I just wondered how you found that when you've written the whole script in terms of what you do with, I guess, how that action plays out that might keep it within, say, an M rating or possibly PG, or if that's just not a reality.
Yeah, there's definitely scope to pull it down to that sort of PG kind of level, but also the level to sort of push it up as well.
It's flexible in that way. I think it would depend on, we're not married to the idea of like full on gore or anything like that. It is essentially a comedy film with horror as the kind of the genre tropes that we're subverting.
And most of the horror is the police who come in after Coxie getting caught up on all these horribly dilapidated things, so that you can push either to the extreme or show less.
Yeah. It's more like, it's like a Hunt for the Wilder People, the chase scene at the end of that. Yeah.
Because that feels like a sweet spot in terms of it, as far as I gather, it hit 4 quadrants in terms of everybody went to see it, but the kid was old enough to somehow keep a certain level of kid, in terms of where it could hit a broad audience, a bit like Stranger Things manages to achieve that so well. All I know is my 10 and 12-year-old love Stranger Things because they see themselves. So,
Right, yeah.
And you can age him up. I made it 9 because I think in the Theseus and the Minotaur 8 killed 9-year-olds. But it's actually based on a kid that I taught comedy to, who was probably about 12 or 13, called Arjun, who so you can absolutely age up. Yeah.
Any more questions?
Scope to make it work. As you evolve and talk to marketplace, I think the great thing is you've probably got a lot of flexibility depending on who you partner with.
It would seem to me from your pitch that the bulk of this is going to be shot in a theme park. So relative to showcasing rural locations, how do you kind of reconcile that with the remit of the competition?
It's based on the coastal ones that we went to as kids, depending on the South Coast, me a lot of time North Coast and South Coast. And it's basically just a farm with, like plastic chucked down one of the hillsides and a bunch of just weird animatronics sort of stuck in bits of bushland. Fantasy Glades in Port Macquarie is an abandoned one that you can certainly find a lot of imagery of. And there's Granty's Maze in Kiama is another one. Yeah. So it's basically it's a farm with a lot of like trying to be theme park but not quite succeeding.
Sorry, I just want to quickly ask just John and Penny to give you the opportunity to finish the thought that you were saying as you're being cut off. You were saying that you could see this couple being sort of mixed race or something like that. Is that based on the experience of the child that you taught, or is that something that's
a combination? Yeah, the young boy that I taught who just made me laugh and just was incredibly resilient, but yeah, very sheltered. But also just the experience of driving around, like at Christmas, my wife and I were driving around South Coast New South Wales and inland, and that was all the families that we saw were Indian Australian and Chinese Australian families. All the kind of white families went to the beach and caravan park. But yeah, it was great. And also that's the people who were living and running restaurants in the town and everything. So yeah, like that's the regional town side.
It was a part of your experience of that.
We like the idea of sort of undermining this idea of like the myth of the Australian kind of larrikin and all of that, like the old way of seeing, Australia, and then bringing in a modern family that represents more of the multicultural Australia that we all sort of have grown up in
and live in
now, and sort of using that as a way to sort of show the triumph of the new over the old.
I mean, yeah, Coxie's like a sort of like a relic of the 80s, 90s, like a Mel Gibson or Russell Crowe or Brian Brown. Unhinged. A Ray Maher on meth is, I think.
Great, thank you.
Okay. to our next pitch, which is coming from Katie Huggins with the title of The Deb.
Okay, so The Deb is about a Year 12 student, Billy, who lives in a conservative rural New England town. So Billy lives with his grandfather. He keeps his head down and he studies hard, all the while hiding his crush on rugby star Brendan Paul and his budding interest in drag culture. When their Catholic school hosts the debutante ball, Billy's best friend and outspoken feminist Chow pushes for Billy to make a stand by petitioning to make his debutante in his drag persona, Bubble Ooh Billy. Billy's decision to go through with it divides the school and the greater community as people battle with how to meld the traditional with the modern. In his fight, Billy and Brendan develop a romantic relationship and Billy struggles with the pressure of having to represent a whole culture. The story is about being authentic to yourself and creating community. So overall, the film is a romantic comedy. It's, despite having like niche Australian aspects, I see it being internationally accessible with themes such as exploring the tradition with the modern. I think especially now we're at a time when people are really pushing for modernisation of our culture. I grew up in Tamworth and we had the debutante ball, and that I always argued against as being like way too traditional, way too like not modernised, not inclusive. I see their petition as being a petition in opening a conversation about the debutante being about debuting yourself. So the story also looks at the pressure that I feel like a lot of young people, especially those in marginalised communities, feel as being like the golden child of their community. If they screw up, then they're just another statistic and they've ruined it for everyone else. So for Billy, that's being a representative of the queer community. For Brendan Paul, that's being the perfect Indigenous student who can't make any mistakes. And then, yeah, so it really like highlights individual struggles, and I feel like everyone will relate to that, having dealt with their own issues. So the whole concept was inspired by my own life, as I said, growing up in Tamworth, and we had the debutante ball and we had like all of that sort of more traditional rural lifestyle. And to me, that's what I envisioned as Australia, and that's what I envisioned as Australian stories. It also is about the celebration of RuPaul's Drag Race, which is finally making an Australian series, which is great, and it inspires so much joy and love and acceptance of who you are. But I was also desperate to write this particular story because I really do believe in media representation and how much that affects kids growing up. It creates empathy, it creates individuality, it creates sense of identity. And recently I was watching It's a Sin, and I realised that so much of queer culture that I've seen has always just been about the struggle with HIV and like all those issues, all the darker side. And I really just wanted to make something that was really fun. Sorry.
Katie, sorry.
That's fine. Thank you.
We have to stick to the 3 minutes.
Of course.
Very good, though. Love it. Thank you.
Thank you.
So, judges, do you have any questions? Claire, yes.
I love this idea. Who would you say is your core audience? Because that younger, that sort of YA audience from a cinema perspective are really hard to motivate to come to cinema. And I mean, not that any of these films have to go to cinema, but that is my dream. How are they your core audience, and how, like, outside of them being your core audience, how do you feel you'd reach them?
So yeah, obviously that would be a core audience given that it is a younger crowd. The thing that I really thought of was when I went to see Love, Simon at the premiere at Mardi Gras. That audience was majoritively older people in the queer community, and I really saw that. And even now, like, I'm 28 this year, and it's I still watch like those nostalgic high school movies because I think that's a common element that everyone has, is that experience of high school and about growing up and like the issues that you went through. And so I really do think that it could reach a more broad audience.
Thank you.
Sorry, I probably should know this from the pitch materials, but is it set in the present, and do debutante balls still exist today, or are you imagining it earlier in history?
It's more in the present, maybe just like a few years back, given that we've already made huge leaps and bounds. I was thinking more around the time that I grew up because there just wasn't as an open community, and it wasn't as accepting as I'm sure it has moved on now. debutante balls do still happen. They still happen in Tamworth, particularly. I went to a Catholic school. It was hosted by the Catholic school. So, yeah, it's still a thing.
Yes, this might appear a little bit indelicate, but I'll probably just plow right in there and ask. I suppose as a gay man, I would probably ask you, how do you feel licensed to write the story of young gay men, firstly? And secondly, do you feel you might run into issues around appropriation of stories, particularly with an Indigenous gay character?
Yeah, I've definitely thought about those sort of things. I think like I've always struggled as a writer on those issues of like, where do you get to step in and just be a writer and tell a story, and where do you have to step back and allow other people's voices? So this is still in like very early development stages. So what I'm really hoping to do is to be collaborating with a lot of different people and making it more of a community story. And I just think as a person, as an ally and as someone who's actually in the community, I just feel like I really want to like pave the way for more joyful stories. And I think at the heart of it, it's just about a joyful love story. And I feel like that's something that is universal, that we all have and we all have experienced. And I feel that will hopefully come through, just that light and happiness.
Our next picture is Nora Masagay with Living Country. Over to you, Nora.
Yes, thank you. So my film is called Living Country, working title. The genre is a coming of age dramedy, and my target audience is kind of 15 to 29 years old. So it's about a 15-year-old Ugandan girl who moves to a fictional town of Hayden in country New South Wales, as Australia is on the brink of a severe drought. So the film is loosely based on my life. My parents are Ugandan, but they moved to Botswana for work, and that's where I was born. And we lived there until I was 11 years old, and that's when our family moved to Australia, but we didn't move to the city. We settled in a town called Gunnedah. And yeah, there was only one other African family that lived there, so that was an interesting experience. So the film deals with themes of survival, friendship, family, community, racism, romance, bullying, self-esteem issues, identity issues, belonging, and the pressure to fit in. Two worlds are brought together in the small town of Hayden. The African and the Australian cultures are explored through the eyes of 15-year-old Noelle. She must navigate the pressures of becoming a teenager, making friends, and finding her place in a town where not many Africans exist. Will she survive the chaotic jungle that is high school and come out triumphant, or will she succumb to the pressures of fitting in? So I think this project is unique and exciting because it showcases country Australia with its unique charm. There's something special about growing up in a country town compared to growing up in the city, especially when there are not many in the town that look like you. So after Noelle and her family moved to Hayden from Botswana, she invites some of her classmates to her house to complete a school assignment. She doesn't realize that her mother has organized a lunch for the Hayden Women's Society on the same day at the same time. And so when Noelle's classmates arrive at her house to discuss the assignment, one of her classmates, Bridget, finds a way to finish all the water in the household. And at this time, there are strict water restrictions because it's an extreme drought. So this sends an alert to the Hayden police, who arrive at Noelle's house to investigate the water breach. And then they're eventually fined for the breach, and they have to attend what is called drought court because this drought has got extremely serious. And so the family tried to argue their case because they have no idea how the water was breached, the water restrictions were breached. And then they claim that one of Noelle's classmates was actually the one who made it happen. But they're eventually fined because the court believes that the family are the ones who did it. So when Noelle returns to school, everyone's speaking about the case. She tries not to talk about it, but that's all that the town is talking about. Her family eventually finds a lawyer to help argue the case, and they eventually win. And then we find out who the perpetrator is, and they're fined $5,000. And then everyone in the town becomes suspicious of each other. And Noelle eventually finds some kids at school who she fits in with. And
that's time. That's time, Nora.
Okay.
Well done. Thank you.
Just a quick one. I was curious to know, I guess, the choice to make it a fictitious place, and also how much you can pull from stories from real life experience to sort of, I guess, get greater gravity to the experience of a family like that in a country town, I suppose. So that, do you have a lot of stories that you know from other families that have kind of informed the sort of story choices you've made?
I think so. I've met a few other Africans who have had a similar experience growing up in a country town. So I think that would be interesting to kind of do some research and find out what their experience is, and maybe try and pull into the story a bit more. Does that answer the question?
No, I think so. I think it's a lovely story world, and it feels like it gives a lot of, there's a lot of curiosity for me in it, particularly, from a sort of a real lived experience for people in country towns where it goes wrong. And I suppose it's sort of, the more you can tie events in the story to things that you can point to, so it's kind of inspired by true experience. I think that kind of gives more intrigue into what audience are going to see, and the revelation of it, I guess. So, but it's really, I think you've got the basis of a fantastic story. So, good on you.
Thanks. And I think you mentioned about fictionalizing the town as well, instead of keeping it. And I think it kind of ties in with what you were saying. It's like there's so many other people that have had that experience in different towns. So I wanted it to be a made up town, and kind of, again, used many lived experiences.
Yeah, so just to pick up on what Virginia said, there is definitely an authenticity, I suppose, that comes off the page with this one. I suppose I would ask about the third act. I kind of find myself wondering, so the bad family and the good family, they both end up leaving town. So I just kind of wondered, for that proposed resolution in your script, what is it that you're trying to tell us in having kind of everybody vacate the stage?
Yeah, I was kind of grappling with how to kind of end it, and it is in its very early stages. And I guess it's kind of like, I don't really want it to be exactly the good family, the bad family. I want whoever's known as the bad family to kind of also have something that makes you feel a sense of wanting them to succeed as well, not we punish these and not punish these. So I guess what I want people to take from it is of African families kind of going through living in a regional town. And I guess at the end of it, the whole leaving thing for me, leaving was what changed my kind of perspective of Australia, because I'd only had that regional Australian kind of perspective. So the leaving part for me is what shifts, I don't know how to explain, but like shifts it to, I don't know. That just seemed like the ending. Yeah, for me, I don't really know how to explain it.
Well, no, I suppose then just perhaps a takeout to consider is just that, because I think it's kind of important, to my mind, in script terms, the resolution, because that then asks, it answers the question as to why somebody pays $20 to see it. So I think the resolution is important because it will bring to the fore exactly what it is you're trying to say through the script, which, as I say, has this authenticity that comes off the page.
What I wanted to say is that I love the way that this clearly shifts the gaze in the way that this story is being told, and it's something that we haven't seen enough of, in my opinion. And growing up Indigenous Australian in Australia, I completely understand where you're coming from. But it's sort of similar, just more a comment than a question, saying, for me, what I want to see is some kind of intercultural empathy and understanding towards the end. And there's that idea of listening that's happening amongst the community, in a sense, as opposed to this kind of abandonment. And I think that, just as I said, supplementing what Mark was saying, but I feel like it feels like it deserves that a little bit. Just a comment, not even a question. Sorry.
You're allowed. You're allowed. So our next and second to last pitch, Sunny Grace with Never the Bride. Sunny.
Never the Bride is a subversive rom-com set in the picture paradise wedding mecca of Byron Bay, where not everything is as perfect as it seems. It is the story of a commitment-phobic wedding planner called Skye, who is almost 50, single, self-deprecating, a tad jaded and perimenopausal, but still up for a party and still looking for Mr. Right. Skye is a fantasist. This makes her a great wedding planner. She makes other people's fantasies come true at the expense of her own, and her commitment phobia comes from not living in her own reality. When we first meet Skye, her life is in freefall. Her business took a big hit from COVID, but to be fair, it was already struggling. Perhaps because people can tell her heart is no longer in it. The owners of the home she rents are coming back to live in 3 weeks. She accessed all her savings and superannuation during COVID. All her credit cards are maxed. And if she doesn't get more work, she could end up homeless. This is not good given the housing crisis in Byron Bay. Needing the money, she accepts a high-paying wedding despite its caveat. She won't know who the groom is until the wedding day, as he is a famous Hollywood star and they don't want the paparazzi to get wind of it. When the Bucks crash the hens party, Skye discovers the groom is her ex-boyfriend, whom she met at acting school. He is now an A-list Hollywood star, and she has spent the last decade thinking he was the one that got away. She decides if she wins him back, all her dreams will come true, all her problems will be solved. But in doing so, she realises he isn't the love of her life after all. He's a tad narcissistic, and she is destroying 3 lives instead of just her own. She will have to do her best Jane Austen to get the couple and the wedding back together. Skye discovers she is actually her own Mr. Right and needs to make her own dreams come true. Now, Byron Bay as a character, like Skye, is complex. I've been coming and going from this area for over 25 years, and I got married here in 2001. We were the first wedding at the same property Margot Robbie got married at, because back then we lived there. So there is plenty of room to play with Byron's contradictions and eccentricities and cliches, from Instagrammers to hippies to the new rich to the Hollywood stars. Imagine the hens party at Gaia Retreat with tarot card readers and crystal healing, maybe even a cameo from Olivia Newton-John herself. Even though it's a comedy, Never the Bride explores very real issues. Affordable housing is at a crisis point in Byron Bay, especially for single women over 50. The patriarchal fairy tale is still prevalent in shows like The Bachelor and tells us that if you find your prince, you will live happily ever after and pit women against women, despite studies showing married men fare better than married women in heterosexual marriages. I wonder what the studies will show about same-sex marriage. Perhaps that can be the sequel, call it Never the Groom. But I am getting ahead of myself. Let's make Never the Bride first. This truly is a regional story with global appeal. We need stories like this after COVID. Fun and with heart, but still examining issues of our time.
Time.
We talked about the hippie culture and all of the tarot card reading and stuff. So is that what you're sort of seeing being some kind of ironic, are you critically looking at that kind of cultural appropriation that happens in Byron anyway? Is that what you mean by that?
Yeah, I think it's really interesting, the contradictions that happen here, because I grew up in Bellingen as a hippie kid, right, with like full self-sufficiency, no electricity, nothing, with single moms and we killed the chickens, blah, blah, blah. Whereas around up here, it's like, it's people buy hippie culture. It's like boho chic, and it's like a Camilla caftan that costs $1,000. And there is more Botox in Byron Bay than Double Bay these days, I reckon. So that's kind of the comedy element that's going to be threading through. However, by the same token, I do really believe that the hippies were onto something, and the more that kind of people can grow their own and learn to use less electricity and things like that, the world will be a better place. But I do think in this town that is literally being loved to death, there is a real contradiction there. I have a real love-hate relationship with Byron, to be honest. So my husband loves living here, and I'm forever dragging us away, and he's forever dragging us back. It's really, really beautiful, but there is a really big noticeable divide between rich and poor, And that comes in waves, just like there's waves of immigrants, you know, all the time, from the whalers to the hippies to now the Instagrammers to the Hollywood A-list. I mean, there's always Hollywood A-list. There was Paul Hogan, and now we have the Hemsworths. But yeah, there's just this really interesting, I don't know, I find it a fascinating place, but I can't stay too long. I mean, the traditional elders did say it's a healing place, but if you stay too long, you go mad. And I kind of think that that's true. And so I guess Sky's gone a bit mad staying here for probably too long than she needed to.
Thank you.
It did feel in the third act that you had a very sudden gear change. So, and how realistically you will carry off a sort of self-commitment ceremony. So I thought there was a bit of a danger that you were lurching kind of out of My Best Friend's Wedding and into sort of Glee with Sue Sylvester marrying herself. So I just thought, just as a caution, because to my mind it felt like a very sudden jolt and change, and kind of took you out of this, you know, quasi-realist comedy and into a different territory. Did you want to talk about that a little?
Yeah, I will, for sure. I mean, it's funny because this idea literally came to me before this. So to be honest with you, when I wrote the original pitch, that's kind of where it came from my, you know, we call the lull, the blurt out, whatever. But since then I've been giving it more thought, and I watched My Best Friend's Wedding again on the weekend actually, and like it's actually terrible in terms of feminism, to be honest, in retrospect, watching it again. So I think that is a bit twee, that ending of her having her own sort of marriage ceremony. What I thought could be really interesting, and I still, you know, it's early days with the actual overall script because I haven't written all of it yet, but I'm playing with the idea that she's really smart and she's just been kind of coasting in her life, and she needs to take responsibility for her own life, right? And so maybe it's a case of maybe a little bit more bit of Bridget Jones's diary thrown in there, you know, with her friends around her. She's got good friends. She is a good friend. She is a good woman. She needs to find her own way out of that scenario. I don't know if it's like she decides she wants to go back to uni, or she has to work out a way to stand on her own 2 feet and be independent finally. And there is no fairy tale ending.
Cool. Thank you.
Okay, here we are. The ultimate. Jenny Winter with Off Grid.
So when I was 5 years old, my mum, who was a single mum, suddenly died completely out of the blue. She had an aneurysm. And the very first Christmas after her death, my grandma, who was now raising my little sister and I, took us down to Tasmania so that we could be with family for Christmas. So we went to stay with my uncle in his amazing rainforest acreage in this tiny little pink cottage that he made himself by hand. It had no electricity, no heating, definitely no council approvals, no toilet even actually. We had this outdoor hole with a seat on it, and one of the great defining moments of my childhood was finding a leech on my bum. But I loved it, not the leech bit, but I loved this area and this lifestyle, and I spent so many school holidays there, and it was just magical. It felt like a foreign land. Now, because my mum died, grief is just such a big theme for me. I am so fascinated about what that does to us in terms of our relationships and moving forward, and I feel like it can really disconnect you from your emotions and kind of put this wall up because you don't want anyone to come too close because you don't want to feel that pain again. So then I thought, gosh, what better setting could there be to look at emotional disconnection than a location that is physically disconnected and a place that is off-grid. So Off-Grid is a romantic comedy, and it's about a mother who is raising her children alone after her husband has died when they are quite young. And finally, after a decade, she is ready to put herself out there and be vulnerable and go for love again, only to be horrifically burned by a con artist. So she has no choice but to move her boys down to live with her dead husband's dad, so her father-in-law and ex-brother-in-law, on their beautiful acreage that's off-grid. So it is a romantic comedy, but it's also really heart-wrenching and moving. And we yes, there's a bit of the comedy of the fish out of water, Schitt's Creek sort of thing where they're trying to adapt their new lifestyle, but it's really more about their emotional journey and about them trying to reconnect with each other, but with nature, but really with themselves. And we really want them to make it work, and we want her to find love again with her ex-brother-in-law. Complicated. So I think at the moment, given what the whole world has gone through, I feel like these themes of being disconnected from each other and trying to recover after an unexpected life event is so timely. And all of us artists pitching today, we're putting ourselves on the line, even though we've just been through a lot too. And why do we do it? Because it's worth it. You don't want to rob yourself of good stuff. Thank you.
Thank you.
I think it's very charming to start a pitch with a personal point of view. It's very engaging, and it really, it's a personal touch is very nice, I think, in terms of getting a world across, and it makes it very memorable. So good one, I reckon.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah.
I'd kind of also say, actually, I thought your conversational style again was kind of really, drew the listener in. So I'd add to Virginia's compliments there. On this one, you're based in Queensland and you've written this piece for Tasmania. So that really interested me because I think you were unique amongst the cohort today of, crossing the borders. It seems very well suited to the story. But in the end, what made you pick, Tasmania instead of, I don't know, far north Queensland would be the first question. And secondly, did you have an eye to financing with that, or was it just purely in story terms you wanted to do that?
Oh, definitely just story terms. So obviously, because I spent so much of my upbringing there, like I can't even tell you how long that feels to a child with no electricity and no television. So it feels like my second home now, and especially so my grandmother that raised me, so she died a few years ago. So now I don't have a childhood home in Queensland. So when I go to Tassie, so I went there in January before lockdown, that feels most like my home now, if that makes sense, even the smell of being there. So for me, I mean, yes, I suppose technically you could set it somewhere else, but for me, the heart of it is there. And I'm so in love with it. I mean, visually, it is just ridiculously stunning. Yeah.
And do you have any visibility or aspiration as to any producers that you'd like to help you realise this one?
I don't, and that's where I would really love to be connected through AACTA to get some advice on that, because obviously someone with a comedic sensibility, but I also, because it is going to be really heart-wrenching, somebody who's got that comedy tragedy kind of thing.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Fantastic. Thank you to all the pitches. They were all amazing. Such an amazing range of stories. And you all stood up and did it really well. Now, what will happen now is our 5 judges will go into a breakout room where they will select the person who they believe pitched the best with the best idea. I'm trying to find a way to say not the winner because I hate the winner, and the award goes to. So we can all take a break. We are ready after an obviously difficult and exhaustive deliberation between the judges to announce the recipient of the 2021 AACTA Screenworks Regional Landscapes Mentorship recipient. So over to Claire Gandy, who is going to make the announcement.
We all really loved everybody's pitches so much. And it would be great to be able to, we're all super keen to support each and every single one of these pitches and can't wait to see what comes of all of them. But in the end, the one that we chose as the successful pitch was the Deb. Congratulations, Katie.
Oh my God, thank you. I had my perfect face for what was another brilliant idea. Thank you so much to everybody for everybody who chose us, and thank you to everybody who participated. I listened to every single pitch and just kept thinking in the back of my head, oh my God, I want to see this at the movies, oh my God. So thank you for believing in my idea, and thank you so much to the judges and to everybody. Thank you.
Thank you all for taking part in it. Thank you all for doing such wonderful work, and hopefully see all of your works on whatever screen sometime in the future. Well done. Thank you all.